Welcome to the Tell Me Why podcast. As a personal trainer in New York City, Jayson Westley Leisenring has amassed top fitness certifications and considerable knowledge over the years. Why? Because he's insanely curious. Jayson shares the same mantra as Albert Einstein. As he said, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. So come along with him and see what we can discover about our bodies, human movement, fitness, and health. And remember, don't ever lose your sense of wonder.
Here we go. Jayson Westley, along with Mike Zhao here. And so, as you guys know, I love learning different parts of fitness, health, everything. And so that's why this is called the Tell Me Why podcast. And today, Mike is going to go deep on the foot. And I've always been interested in the foot and why is it so important to go barefoot? And how important are the feet to the rest of the body? Okay? And so it's very interesting. It's just a couple things that he's been telling me. So we're going to break it up to 3 points. Foot brain, foot strength, and foot shoes. Okay? So we're going to go deep as far as what kind of, Mike has said that the foot is basically the window to the rest of the body and the window to the brain. That's interesting. I want to learn more about that. And then also foot strength, how having a strong foot also helps the knees and hips and everything like that. That's going to be awesome. Can't wait for that. And then different shoes that you should be wearing and not wearing. Loving it. All right? Awesome. So foot brain, basically tell us a little bit about how the foot is the window to the soul or window to the brain.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, the window to the soul thing is not that far-fetched. It's really not that far-fetched. So, folks, get ready for some really strange ways of like looking at your body and function and things like that. So first of all, our brain really can't conceptualize or perceive the ground as, from a physical standpoint, exactly the same way as we intellectually conceptualize the ground. Here's what I mean. So when you think of the ground, you think of this almost infinitely large flat surface, right? Even though when you think about it, you know it's not flat because we're on a spherical planet. Nevertheless, as far as you're concerned, it's a flat because you think flat ground, right? So like I said, intellectually we know it's flat. But when we interact with the ground, it's anything but flat because our feet are not flat, right? The bone structures of our feet, as well as the muscles on the bottom of the feet, they are not flat. They're not uniform. Some parts of it are thicker. Some parts of it are not as thick, both from bony landmarks and architecture as well as muscular attachments. So in other words, even if the ground is flat and obviously within the surface area that a human being can occupy on this spherical planet, as far as you're concerned, it is indeed flat.
Just walking down the street, walking on a flat surface.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But because of the aforementioned architectural features of the feet, your brain's interaction with this flat ground will not be flat because the sensors you're using to sense this flat surface is not flat. Mm-hmm. So my point is, depending on how you run your feet, how you control your feet, the ground is going to appear different to your brain. Mm-hmm. More importantly, it's really not going to interpret the shape of the ground for what it is for its own sake. Mm-hmm. It does not care how flat or unflat the ground is. It just cares about certain very specific features of the foot and how it interacts with the ground. And it's going to take that, I'm going to explain more in detail in a second here, but it's going to take that interaction and leverage it for the brain's own needs.
Okay, so what you're saying is basically the brain doesn't give a crap that it's a flat surface or not. It's just trying to move you forward, and it's sensing what the foot is doing, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right? So the shape of the ground, it limits in a very good way, in a very desirable way, it limits how your foot can leverage the ground against whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the foot's gonna, a healthy functional foot should have the ability to conform itself to whatever shape the ground is to a large degree.
So the foot also, as you're saying, it's basically like this, right?
It's kind of more or less like that.
Basically like that.
Sure.
It grabs, okay.
Yeah.
And so as it walks, it should, a healthy foot should be like a claw, sort of, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. And that's the way it's going. And basically you're saying that the ground, that your brain has no idea whether it's flat or not. It just how the foot is moving.
Absolutely, right. So in other words, a relatively esoteric way of thinking about it is that it is the shape of your foot that dictates the shape of your ground, as far as your brain's concerned. It is not the other way around, because if you have a foot that cannot move, I don't mean like move in space, you can pick up your foot and things like that, but if your foot cannot close and open at will, then it's gonna limit how your brain can interact with the ground. So then at which point it really doesn't matter if it's an even patch of ground or uneven patch of ground. Your foot becomes the biggest limiting factor. And with a foot that can dynamically close and open at the appropriate times, it really also doesn't matter the shape of the ground. It then becomes up to the foot to adapt itself to whatever shape of the ground, and it really doesn't matter anymore. Like I said, the shape of the ground.
Okay, so almost if your foot's not healthy, if your foot is off, then it's not essentially you're not walking on a flat surface. You're walking on you're almost walking on maybe like rocks or something like that.
Precisely.
Each step.
Precisely. Your foot becomes the obstacle. It doesn't matter how smooth the ground is, right? And with a functional foot, your foot, this foot that is able to perform its duties, then in the same token, it no longer matters how austere your terrain is.
Mm-hmm. So then it's not as good of a sensor if it's not walking correctly. Then is that what you're saying?
Yes. It needs to be a very, very adequate sensor, because
it's not a good sensor if you're off. And we're going to get into later on, I think, as far as just how the foot can be off and everything like that. But if you're messed up, if you've been walking in heels or you've been doing something wrong and your feet are just off, then the sensory aspects of the foot are not as good.
Absolutely, and one of the things that sort of that is a relatively fundamental mechanism of the brain is that your nervous system is very, very sensitive to change, and any and all things that you perceive are a result of changing states between two things. Mm-hmm. So, and this is observed across all levels of the nervous system. Now, specifically with foot, so because the foot is a part of your musculoskeletal system, it's a set of bones, bony framework that is moved by soft tissue. So a combination of ligaments, cartilage, tendons, muscles. Primarily, the motions are perpetuated by muscles on the active end. So what does that mean, right? That means for your brain to sense your foot, it needs change. It can't just be stuck in a given position. If it is, then it is not reading signals from your foot if you have a foot that does not move, that cannot change its own shape. Because your primary source of sensory perception about joints comes from muscles and tendons. There are secondary sources of information. We'll not get
Say
to
it
that
again.
part. Yeah.
Say it again.
Sure.
The primary source of information comes from what now?
Your muscles and tendons.
Okay.
That connects joints, that connects bones, connects articulations.
That's the brain's main sensory of what, like, everything that's going on.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And like I said, there are other sources, but they are not as important. What I mean by important is they're not as fast, therefore they're not as accurate. So for you neural nerds out there, that means these sensory pathways are linked by thicker axons, right? Thicker axons meaning faster conduction speed. So anyways, so just like all sensory receptors, they work off of change. So in this specific sense, this specific context, we're talking about change in muscle length as well as tension.
Change in what? Muscle what?
Muscle length.
Muscle length, okay.
Muscle length and the amount of forces going through these musculotendinous unit, as in the structures, the complex formed by your muscles and the tendons that attach them. So, bringing us back to the importance of a foot that can change shape, because if it cannot change shape, then all these stretch receptors in all the joints in your feet are not going to be able to report information back to the brain, which means now the brain has no idea what the foot is doing. It may know that the foot is just simply not doing anything, and the interesting thing is that if you do this for long enough time, your brain will stop perceiving the fact that you even have a foot, and other things are going to have to happen for your brain to realize this.
Okay.
We'll get into that maybe another day. But nevertheless, from purely a perceptual and sensory perspective, this necessitates a foot that can change shape. But yeah, does that make sense?
It's getting there. I mean, that opens up a whole new. Just as far as the foot has to be able to move, all right, and to move healthily, in a healthy manner, in order for the brain to distinguish what's going on and everything like that. All right?
Yeah. So from a perceptual standpoint, the feet are kind of like the sensory foundation for the rest of the body. Meaning, you can think of it this way. So for your actual body, in the brain, there is a virtual dummy that represents your physical body, and that's made up of your sensory, all the full spectrum of your sensory inputs. So in your brain's constantly trying to figure out where your bones are in space and in relation to other adjacent bones. So because gravity pushes us down, the lowest part of you needs to be figured out first before the stuff above it, like your shin, your knee, your hips, and things like that, can be planned accordingly in terms of movement. Because if you got to go forward, you need to set up your foundations first. You don't
need your what?
You need to set up your foundations first. Now, what I mean by that is, from a planning standpoint, your brain first has to figure out, okay, I have the ground. For various different senses are telling me there's a ground there and something is pushing me down towards the ground. So that I need to somehow keep myself safe from this constant downward force.
Gravity.
Which means I need the lowest part of me to be the most stable, so the stuff above it can be supported. Therefore, without a foot that is capable of supporting the rest of your body, you got a big problem, right? You got a big problem. And the human brain is infinitely adaptable. It's gonna come up, if you don't have this support, it's gonna come up with other ways, different ways of supporting this thing that you're trying to do, which is going forward, going up, whatever. And sometimes you may have a price to pay.
So, all right, I don't know. Maybe I just want to. Basically, what you're saying there is it really lends to the whole barefoot thing. I mean, if you're nervous, if your brain can't sense a good healthy foot, then your brain won't even sense that you have a foot, and that's going to have problems, gravity and everything like that. So, I mean, let's get into a little bit as far as just the strength. I guess the differences between a weak foot and a strong foot, and what does that lend to as far as how the ankles work, how the knees work, and how the hips work. I mean, we can get back into the brain stuff maybe in a little bit, but you're really the more you're talking, man, it's like you're an idiot for not going barefoot a lot, I think. And so I just want to hear more as far as how it really affects. I see these women with these feet that go like this from wearing tight shoes, and it's got to be like wearing a cast. And so we all know what happens when we wear a cast for a good 6 months, 6 weeks, whatever, and your arms basically become, I don't know, weak. And so how bad is this for the feet, man? Like just a little bit as far as how much does the foot lead to ankle strength, knee strength, hip strength, everything else?
So in terms of stabilization and load-bearing functions, the foot can make a huge difference. So we want to cut to a video with anatomic diagrams and things like that, so you guys can help you visualize this a lot better. All right, folks, we are in the digital version portion of this podcast. We are looking at the right leg model within the ab complete anatomy. So let's get a lay of the land here in a second. So I've just removed connective tissues and muscles. All right, so here's the foot. Right. What we really care about is this guy, this guy. Okay, so the navicular here, if I were to orient things this way, you can sort of see that there's a curve from the top part of this bone, from this current perspective, into the lateral or outside, the right-hand side from your screen. Right, there's this curve. Like if you can imagine, this is kind of shaped like a boat. Which is why it's called a navicular. Latin, I think navis.
Like a boat, or like a
boat.
Bean, kind of like almost.
Well, like kind of like a bean too, but they named it after a boat. So, anyways, this bone and its connection with the talus, this newly highlighted bone. So, their relationship and what they do with each other dictates how stable or unstable the rest of the foot is going to be. So I'm gonna sort of zoom things into the talus for a second here, right? So right now the ball, currently we are looking at the front of the talus,
and both of these bones are right at the base of the foot, where the tibia meets the foot itself. So right at the base of your foot, where it meets your leg.
Yep. Yeah. So speaking of that, that's actually perfect. So right now we're looking at the front of the talus. So now if I were to do this relatively big round shape, this is exactly the portion of the talus that the leg slots into. Right? So now we're looking at the left side of this. Now we're looking at the right side of this.
It looks like it's so nice and round. And how it could really make for good leg or foot movement,
Absolutely. So the one of the convenient things about this structure is that it's very oddly shaped, right? You have rounded edges and sort of cups, so to speak, and divots all over the place. Now, it's very, very, very convenient for everything that it articulates with, everything that it connects with. So one of the primary structures that the talus connects with that is of functional significance is the calcaneus, your heel bone, so to speak.
Calcaneus, okay.
So now look at all these connection points, all these articulations. Most of them connect with the talus, and sort of imagine how a talus would sit onto the top of this. This happens in a way that allows the talus and calcaneus, these two bones, to connect and control each other. Meaning you don't actually need to control these two bones separately. So before I dive into the nitty-gritty parts of this, Now, I've just repopulated all the muscles that are in this region. Can you see how there is actually no muscle that connects to the talus? Right? The talus is muscle free. Everything around it, up, down, forward, backward, have muscular attachments. The talus itself does not. Right? So the talus sort of acts as a suspension system. Or rather, it forms a suspension system with everything else that it articulates in this region. So this is going to take a little bit of imagination, but we're also going to provide you with
when you say suspension system, what do you mean? Like a shock absorber kind of thing?
Yeah, like a shock absorber and a mitigator of forces that travels through this bone. Okay. Right, so the part that I'm about to explain next is going to require some imagination, but don't worry, we'll also have a video that sort of demonstrates this mechanism I'm about to explain. So, like I said just now, no muscle actually attaches to the talus. So therefore, its motions will be controlled by everything else, meaning your navicular to a relatively large degree, and to a smaller degree the heel bone, the calcaneus. So when your foot unlocks and your foot splays out, so to speak, or opens, the navicular, the from our current perspective on the screen, the right side of the navicular opens like a hinge, like a door. Okay, and the left side of the navicular, not the left side of the bone, but left side of the green thing that is highlighted right now, stays more or less with the talus. So that part, the left part of this green thing, the navicular right now, acts as a door hinge, and the right side of the navicular acts as the doorknob side of the door, and it opens. And when that opens, this arch here that's created by this bone, and bottom of this bone, like this arch, drops. It drops and the whole foot opens. It will open in a manner that includes this bone going towards the left side of the screen, right? And these guys are gonna get away from each other progressively more and more. As this foot opens. So that's what happens when your foot loses structural integrity. Now, that's not the end of the world, provided you can gain it back. So what do I mean by that, right? Hopefully everybody can see this structure here. Now, this is a relatively large muscle. But the interesting thing about this thing is that it starts in the back of the leg, right? It connects both, it forms a connection between both the leg bones, both the tibia and the fibula. And it runs down the leg. And folks, I can't highlight this from the screen, so I'm gonna have to be real descriptive about what I'm trying to bring your attention to. So the tendon that is in the middle of the screen right now, meaning the white strand band that is traveling down the back of this person's leg and into their foot, you can see here that it takes a turn, right? The turn is easier to see here. Right now we're talking about the bottom of the leg in the back. It takes a turn towards the center of the foot, right? And once it arrives, quote unquote, in the center of the foot, it sort of branches out into so many different bones. Can you all imagine that if this was to shorten and contract this band that we just got done paying attention to, it would bring, you know what, let me back out. So if this band was to contract, like this yellow thing that we've highlighted, can everybody see that the navicular, the right side of the navicular will close into the talus, right? This process, technical difficulties. This process will close the foot. One of the big things that I want to have people take away from this is that the same muscle that closes the foot through closing the navicular onto the talus also control much of the rest of the medial foot. Medial foot meaning like the inside of your foot, so to speak, the thumb side, the big toe side. It closes all of that. It has great capacity to control many things here. So what am I saying, right? When the foot closes by using this peculiar muscle called a tibialis posterior or posterior tip, you are beginning a process of locking the foot through some relatively powerful mechanisms. So there's this guy, and as you can see here, it is not a small muscle at all. And more importantly, it has great mechanical advantage in closing the foot, because the foot would be much more difficult to close if whatever is trying to close the foot is anchored here or here. But it's not. It is anchored very close to the fulcrum, meaning the pivot point. So that makes this muscle very efficient in closing the foot. So another main big player is this guy, right? So a lot of people associate this with your arch, right? Your arch muscle, so to speak, right? Your abductor hallucis, it assists the posterior tip in closing the foot, right? As you can see, if or rather. Let me borrow your imagination here a second. It connects to the sort of most proximal, meaning the most the highest portion of this bone here, right? And when this muscle contracts, it is going to bring this bone towards your heel bone. But if this is going to happen without the rest of the foot closing, you might have some problems. Might have to do with some bunions. We'll see. But if posterior tip is able to move the navicular, the bone that's highlighted currently, then when this contracts and it brings this guy towards this guy, then you have a whole foot that is learning how to close. Right? And obviously these are not the only muscles that control the stability and structural integrity of the whole foot. There are other things that are in play, but I would say that these two muscles, because of where they're connected at, they have some pretty significant roles to play in this. Right? All right, cool, guys. That's been the digital portion of this podcast. I will see. But the architecture of the foot lends itself to directly, not indirectly, directly impact the stabilization of the knee, the hip. Okay, that's directly. It will indirectly impact the stabilization of everything above it. So what does that mean, right? There are muscles in the foot that closes the foot against downward forces. That stabilizes the foot so that it sets up the stage for proper centration. So centration meaning proper joint mating at the articulation of the knee as well as the hip.
Proper centration basically is saying that, okay, if this is properly grasping the floor, then the ankle's going to be set, the knee's going to be set, the hips are going to be set.
Absolutely.
And if you're off, that's going to just screw everything up.
Well, I mean, it won't necessarily screw everything up. It can, absolutely. But if your foot is not as stable as it can be, what it will mean is stuff at the knee or control structures at the knee and at the hip will have to work harder to stabilize the whole leg. Sometimes, oftentimes, it will be beyond the capacity of knee and hip structures to stabilize. In other words, 2 people are doing the jobs that require 3 people.
What are shoes turning off, essentially?
Well, it depends on the shoes. So, not all shoes are bad. Not all shoes are bad. But some shoes, depending on where you're at, meaning your ability to control your feet, some shoes can hamper your ability to sense a moving foot. So what I mean by that, right? So there are some shoes out there that provide significant arch support. So much so that you don't actually have to create an arch. That becomes a problem sometimes. So meaning, if you don't know how to create an arch, and that is coupled with your inability to control your ankle, your inability to control your knees, that might be a good thing to have significant arch support, so that at least, you know, during your daily activities, you're not like experiencing pain or the movement dysfunction that you can't do certain things. At least you might be safe from that. But nevertheless, you're not tapping into your brain's capacity to control your foot and adapt the shape of the foot to the ground. Mm-hmm. So that may cost you certain things as your activity level goes up or as you age. Nevertheless, it's kind of like a crutch, right? Mm-hmm. If you chose it well, and the arch support in the shoes, or you have a good set of insoles, are well made, it will keep you out of trouble. But again, like I said, it's going to hamper you from developing these relatively crucial skill sets that you're going to want in controlling your feet.
So it's basically taking away the need to grasp.
Absolutely.
Everything like that.
Right. The shoe's going to be doing a lot of work for you, so why would you ever learn to do this on your own?
That's essentially what the shoe is doing. Basically, you have no reason to grasp and work the arches and everything like that. I mean, you hear people saying they need the insoles and they need everything like that. Is there ever a reason that you should not go barefoot, or you should pretty much should always try to strengthen the foot, right?
Absolutely.
No matter what.
Well, so I would say if you don't know how to control a foot, and it's probably safe to say that, like, unless you have a decent understanding of the underlying mechanical and neurological skills required to control a foot, it's not difficult to hurt yourself going bare feet for running, lifting, or whatever. It could potentially make things worse. But under the guidance of someone that can teach you how to do this, you're going to want to go barefoot because you're going to want to develop these skill sets.
And just strengthen those muscles and make them stronger, right?
Well, I mean, that's one part of it, but the strong muscles, if they are managed poorly from a planning standpoint and movement standpoint, are not going to be able to do their job as our architecture requires them to. Mm-hmm. For example, you could have a strong set of calves, strong set of posterior tip, strong arch muscles. If your brain don't know what to do with those, you're still going to have an unstable ankle. You're still going to have an unstable knee.
What do you mean? Just if your brain doesn't recognize or sense the bottom of the feet, you can have strong calves, strong everything like you said, but if your brain doesn't recognize the senses from the foot, then it doesn't matter. Is that what you're saying?
That is true, but that's not the only thing. So it needs to be able to sense those things, and it needs to be able to sense the forces that go up and down the foot. Mm-hmm. It also needs to know what to do with those forces, what to do with these things that it's sensing. Mm-hmm. It needs to know what sequence of muscles needs to turn on for whatever contingency, whatever set of circumstances that it senses. It's not just about having strong muscles. It's not even just about having the ability to sense these things. Mm-hmm. You also need a plan. You also need essentially a motor pattern that allows you to come up with solutions with these movement and kinetic problems. Because the brain in general, but the musculoskeletal system specifically, is a problem-solving machine. Mm-hmm. You need to feed it problems that it can solve. They can't be too great of problems, and they can't be too easy of problems. It needs to be just enough. Mm-hmm. For example, like, I don't know, college freshmen don't need to worry about graduate level coursework, nor does he need to waste his fucking time dealing with middle school stuff.
Right.
So, meaning, depending on where you're at in terms of your skill level for foot mechanics, your shoes will not be the same. For example, if you're coming in with, I don't know, something like either knee pain or knee stiffness or lack of range of motion, and or something like plantar fasciitis or like lack of ankle dorsiflexion.
You're a mess.
Or you know, like you're kind of a mess down there. We don't need you to go bare feet like tomorrow.
No.
You are frankly not ready for that yet.
No.
You probably need some arch support while you learn how to manage these things. You know, when things have gotten to that stage where stiffness has developed, that means your brain has already sort of given up on the fact that you have 26 bones in your feet.
Yeah.
It's just become one solitary block. It's going to take some time to develop the proprioception and the sensitivity to even recognize that you have more than one thing in your foot.
Right.
So as that develops, you're going to need to back off on your arch support, right? So you're going to be transitioning into shoes that has lower and lower arches as your ability to make your own arch increases.
Yeah.
So you can't just go with minimal shoes
Minimus,
right from the get-go, nor can you stay with high arch support shoes forever. You know, it's going to take some planning, it's going to take some observation to sort of manage this process. But yeah.
Can you think of, so yeah, great. I mean, that's simple. Should have said that right. As far as don't just jump in to go and run a mile barefoot. Of course, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But can you think of some other things as far as look at like the Aborigines or look at the people that live barefoot and that have their feet just really healthy and everything
Absolutely,
like that.
yeah.
And can you think of some differences that they may have? I don't even know. As opposed to, say, somebody that wears the tight shoes, the dress shoes that are they're like concrete slabs, you know, and they're not doing anything. I mean, they're doing everything for the foot. Can you think of some of the differences that the Aborigines would have compared to somebody that is always in really thick shoes?
Ooh, this is an excellent question. So we're going to cut to a video that's going to talk about the anatomy of the foot a little bit and what happens when your foot hits the ground, or rather what needs to happen with your foot when it hits the ground, and how the foot can come together to get you off the ground. All right, folks, this is going to be a live demonstration on what closing the foot and opening the foot is going to look like. So remember back to the digital video when we talked about the navicular closing and opening like a door on the talus. Right? So pay attention to what's about to happen here. So right now my arch is relatively low to the ground. Right? So if I were to begin to do this, right, I've just now raised my arch. Right? And I am not talking about something like this where I'm just rocking my foot side to side, nor am I like gripping my toes into the ground. So once I properly close my foot like so, my toes are relatively relaxed as they are not involved in all of this. My posterior tip should be doing all the work, and I can certainly feel it. Right? So, and you know, this day and age, it's convenient that you can sort of just slow the video down. So if you were to just take your time with this video and really sort of manipulate how fast the video is playing, you can see that the first thing that moves on my foot is this portion, and then the next thing that moves is this, like so. But if I were to use a toe-centric strategy, my toes will be the first thing to move, and then things will get to here, right? And when that happens, obviously I'll feel my toe muscles, like these guys, functioning and tightening and things like that, but it will not feel very stable. It will feel relatively desperate in terms of loading. But if I were to do this, I can stand up, and my whole weight could be on this mechanism, could be loaded by this closing the foot mechanism. All right, that'll be all for today's live demo. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back.
Okay.
So, in terms of like more ancient cultures that don't use shoes, just feel free to Google this, because obviously you're watching this on the internet. Google what their feet looks like, and you'll think of probably what your feet look like. Theirs will be a lot wider, right? Their digits, like their toes, are going to be further apart, right? And even their what's called their metatarsals are going to be further apart than what you're used to thinking of your feet and other people's feet that you've seen. One of the big reasons is it harkens back to the thing that I was talking about earlier in the episode, in that sensory input is almost entirely based on observable changes. When I say observable, I don't mean your eyes, right? I also mean the sensory receptors at the muscles, right? So if you're further apart, that means when you close it, you are undergoing more change because you're closing through a larger range of motion. So at the same time, a wider foot allows you to sense more of the ground. So you can observe a bigger change in topography. Topography meaning the actual terrain within the surface area that is covered by your foot. So since you're covering a larger piece of the ground, you can sense more of its change. Now, the other thing is, once you can sense a larger patch of the ground, your brain is naturally going to do more with it. So in other words, it's gonna sense more of the ground through the foot. In other words, now as far as your brain's concerned, your foot is the ground. The rest of the ground, as far as your brain's concerned, really doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't concern you. It's just the patch of the planet that's directly under your feet that concerns your brain. So in other words, when you have a foot whose posture is wider, you literally have more ground as far as your brain is concerned. This is a strange idea.
Interesting. So I mean, it's like your brain it has all the neurons firing basically on the whole width of the foot, basically, right? Everything around it, and it becomes a much more. I bet they could, Aborigines or whatever, could really stand on one foot much more securely than somebody like us that really don't have as many neurons firing.
Absolutely, right? Because they are used to negotiating the ground this way. They are used to thinking of the ground this way. Not consciously, I'm sure, but their motor system is much more used to this pattern of behavior in terms of reading the ground from the foot and thinking of the ground as a part of the foot, not the ground as some obstacle or some a piece of the environment that they need to manipulate or anything like that. Whereas for us, we don't have to do that. See, all of this comes out of need. It's not so much that they are somehow better than us or in terms of doing things like this. It comes out of practice. They simply spend more time doing this. Like shoes gives us a tremendous stability. And that stability doesn't necessitate us to sense the ground with more accuracy. You don't need to. Right? You don't need to. Excuse me. You are simply more stable because you're walking around in these boats. Whereas them, they're on their own the whole time since day one, just like we were. It's just that as we grow out of infancy, we get slap-on shoes, and then our brain adapt themselves to this new environment perpetuated by shoes. Whereas them, they don't have that for their reasons. But they don't have that. In other words, they have more practice. They have more practice using the feet to sense the ground.
That's. Can you say they have less knee problems, less hip problems, less overall less ankle problems, less?
It's been a while since I looked into that, but I would be very surprised if they have the same statistics for joint problems that we do. I'll be very surprised.
We'll get back to you on that. I think that it's significantly less.
Yeah, that's what I remembered. I just don't want to put my word on it. But that is what I remember to be.
Just as far as the we'll say the Aborigines or anything like that really just uses their feet all the time and everything like that as compared to the humans. So, all right, we pretty much established, I think anyway, that we need to be barefoot more often, right? So let's talk about shoes as far as you talked about if you're wearing really, I guess, stiff shoes all the time, you're not going to just jump into going bare feet. What are some shoes or what are some things that people should think about when they're picking their shoes or what they're going to wear? Basically.
Okay. So remember back to the graphic video? So if you have control over your arch muscles and posterior tip, and you can sense your foot changing shape as you walk.
How can you tell if you have control over that?
Somebody would have told you in your process of learning to do that. But or if you don't know what I'm talking about, then the next 10 seconds or so does not pertain to you.
But basically, you can claw the ground. You're saying like that.
If you can grab the ground, so to speak, then you won't need shoes that have a lot of arch support. You just need something that is relatively flat. Again, that means your foot is capable of not being flat. So you no longer need shoes that helps you with that. You can do it on your own. So get some flat shoes that is wide enough for your toe box, for your toes to do whatever they want. In other words, when you are picking shoes and you put them on and you're walking, the outer edges of your toes should not feel the inside of your shoes, right? The bottom of your feet should obviously feel the shoes, but the medial and lateral, the outside edges, you shouldn't feel it, right? And if
closing in,
right, and if you just can't find wide enough shoes, I guess it's okay to feel it a little bit, but it should never feel constricted, right? Mm-hmm. Your toes need space to splay out during certain parts of gait, during certain parts of walking.
There's an interesting exercise. If you stand up here and then you lean forward, you feel the toes working. Mm-hmm. If you just stand up like in a plank, and that's essentially how the feet, or sometimes should feel sometimes, as far as the toes doing their job. Am I right in saying that?
Right. So meaning you need to sense different parts, different portions of weight support of your feet. You need to be able to sense moments where you're relying on toes, and there are moments that you are not relying on toes. So if you're leaning forward and leaning back, you're just messing around with like transfer of your weight over your toes, and the whole time you feel toes working, something's wrong. You need to be able to oscillate.
Do you ever want to feel your toes working? And do you want your big toe to be working more? Is that?
You definitely want your big toes to be working more. There's a reason they are disproportionately thicker than all the rest of the toes. So in other words, if you don't sense these things that we're talking about, meaning your arch muscles, your posterior tip, working to lock your foot up, you're going to need help from your shoes. You're going to want shoes that can do a part of that work for you.
Posterior tip doing what?
Posterior tip closing the feet, right, the foot, in moments of gait, meaning when you're loading, when your weight of your torso, your hips, everything above your hips is being loaded over this foot.
Mm-hmm. Is that going to be in the video?
That's going to be in the video.
Okay.
Right. So when that happens, your posterior tip needs to know what to do. Mm-hmm. We are not going to talk about this within the confines of this episode, but you need to, one way or another, learn how to do that. Without that, your foot will not be able to stabilize itself to the degree that it needs to to function as the foot.
Okay, you need to do what else? Say, refine it one more time.
All right, so you need to be able to use your posterior tip
Mm-hmm.
to close your foot
Mm-hmm.
when you are bearing the weight of your torso and the rest of your body.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't do that, you need help with that, because gravity does not care whether or not you can do this.
Mhm.
It will pull you down regardless. So if you cannot do this, something needs to help you to achieve the same thing, or as close as possible. That's where a high arch support or a adequate arch support is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like I said earlier, as you learn to do this, that high arch shoe is going to become less and less necessary.
So the posterior tib working, the big toe working, the walking as a claw as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what else?
Well, that's about it.
3 things,
Now-
I think, right? Posterior tib, the arch working, and the big toe working.
Now, that's not the only thing. It's just that consciously, in terms of skill acquisition, those are the keystones of foot stabilization. If you have those 3 things, everything else will come into place as well. It's just like learning any other skill. There are certain very crucial landmarks that you need to hit. Once you do hit them, everything else sort of just follows them.
So we talked about, all right, so we talked about how the foot is the window to the brain and window to the soul and everything, and how that works. And then we also talked about how the foot, the differences between a strong foot and a weak foot, and how that affects everything from the ankles, the knees, the hips directly, and then everything else indirectly.
Mhm.
Anything on the hormonal part, or anything else as far as anything else you want to talk about?
I will say this. Because the foot is such a important piece of what's called our sensorium. Sensorium is, well, let me back up. So the planetarium is a spherical room where we can watch the projections of like the stars and nighttime sky and things like that. Well, then your sensorium is this metaphysical or non-physical sphere made up of all your senses.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's everything you can see, everything you can hear, everything you can feel, and all the spaces that you can feel. So because the foot is such an important part of your sensorium, and our ability to sense our environment and where we're at in space has such massive implications on our lack of a better term, mental health. The foot has its role to play in stress or stress management.
Interesting.
Right, so look up, everybody. Again, this is the internet, so you can just Google it how you understand,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever you want. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs sort of lays out a very specific pyramid for things that you need,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a good supplement to that is like Google polyvagal theory, Polyvagal, polyvagal theory. So within
You can tell us what it is, or
I'm going to talk about it
Okay.
a little bit.
Okay.
Again, these are massive concepts.
okay.
So they basically talk about there is a hierarchy, pyramid of things that your brain, your nervous system needs to do, needs to achieve before the, I guess, higher part of this pyramid can be accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are not physically safe, meaning
Wow.
if you cannot predict your own resistance, successful resistance against the forces of gravity, other things will not be available to you. Things like cognition, attention, decision making, social interaction. Things like that will not be available to you because your brain does not feel safe
Wow.
physically in your environment. So what am I talking about here, right? So if your joints, like something like a common place would be like your lower back or your spine, neck, maybe shoulders. These places, if your brain senses excessive tension or forces going through these places, it's not going to let you do complex cognitive tasks, like paying attention, like listening to people, like being nice to people, right? Think back on all the times that you are sick, like coming down with a flu or like food poisoning. You are probably an asshole to everybody around you, and not because you want to. You don't have control over that. You after it's over, you might think back, be like, damn, I was a dick, and you didn't want to. It's because of this. Because your brain did not feel safe in its own state. Now, coming back to the foot, right? So, your foot allows you to sense your relationship with your environment, with your immediate environment. So, if your brain don't have that, it is not going to feel safe in its own body. It is going to drive stress level up. Even if there are no new stresses in your life, well, that's a new stress. So the more you can manage that, the more you can get your mind back in your body, lack of a better term, the more it's gonna minimize your stress. Not because it somehow made your problems go away, it's not that. You now have one less massive problem to deal with. Right? Intellectually, it might not be a big deal because as a modern human, you're not gonna fall on the ground and like not be able to get back up. But your brain don't know that. It is still a very crucial, important task your brain needs to be very successful at. And if it's not, it doesn't care what you want to do. It doesn't care that you want to be nice to the people you love, or be able to sit in a meeting and have a successful discussion with business partners. It doesn't give two fucks about that. But yeah,
that's insane as far as like how the energy systems work and your body works. It's just trying to protect you.
Absolutely.
It's just trying to protect you, and it has certain amounts of energy that it goes to our internal systems and everything like that, and that comes first. Our exercise doesn't give a shit about that. It cares more about making sure that we're okay as far as giving enough energy to our body and everything like that. And so on the same level as far as the brain and everything, I'm sure it only has enough, I guess, mental capacity. It's not going to take away from the mental capacity of making sure you're stable and safe and everything else, just to give to you to think about going through a meeting or talking to a girl or talking to whatever, Absolutely. It's going to, I love that as far as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety comes first. And if your body's not feeling safe because your feet are messed up, then the other things that you're trying to do are going to take a hit. So
absolutely.
Go as well.
Because we got to remember, there's you, consciousness, yourself. Then there's the rest of your brain systems that is not under your direct conscious control. So if they don't feel the things that they need to feel, like a full set of sensory input from all the parts of your body that it needs, it is not going to let your conscious brain, conscious self, do all the things that you may want to do.
I love it. Awesome, man. We talked a lot. I love it. Foot
we got a lot done
is
today.
even more important now after hearing all this stuff and everything. I think we're gonna do another one is get a little bit more deep into the foot for like the real nerds and everything out there.
Yes.
But it great stuff, man. I can't say enough. I've learned a lot. I'm gonna be wearing bare feet more often. I'm just thinking of more things that we can talk about. But this is good for this one now. All right? Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Mike.
You got it.
And let's do another one soon. All right.
Take
bye-bye.
care, people.